Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello everybody, welcome to the show today. We are live at Canada's Outdoor Farm Show in Woodstock, Ontario. And today I have a special guest with me, George Sinker. He is a lawyer and resides in Strathroy, Ontario. George, for our audience, can you tell them a little bit about your professional background?
Certainly. Thank you again, first of all, for having me here, Tracy. And I graduated from law school in 1975, grew up on a farm. It was natural for me, anyway, to go to law school because that was my sort of avocation, and decided to come back. Choices were go to Toronto, big city firm, or practice in a small center. And I had noticed that there was a real need in smaller centers for legal representation which was in the community and which was ag-based. And so over the years, actually 44 years now, we've been branding our practice as an agribusiness practice where we help our farm clients with all of the mechanical things that lawyers do, whether it's farm purchases, sales, acquisitions, financing, or corporate work in corporations, reorganizations. And a lot of this work in the last few years, because of the consolidation of farm operations, has become more focused on transition, or what has been commonly called for years succession planning.
Okay.
And I had a problem with what I was seeing in succession planning area. Okay. I would receive instructions from an accountant without having had any advance notice from the family that this was going on, that they were going to do a succession plan where the founder was going to bring the successor into the farming business. But it was, from a tax point of view, very effective. Okay. And perhaps from a people point of view, not as effective as I would have liked. And I felt that from the client's point of view, my farm clients were having to tell their story to the accountant, tell their story again to the lawyer, tell it to their financial advisor and perhaps their life insurance person. And none of these stories were being shared. People were protecting their turf. Okay.
Between the advisors.
That's right. And the losers in the situation were the very clients that we were supposed to be serving.
Shoot, eh? Yeah.
So if you understand the sort of succession 101, it was a situation where the founder would perhaps go to his accountant and say, look, you know, I'm 55 years old, I have 4 children, I have typically in the old days 2 farming sons and 2 off-farm children, but they would typically sit down with the accountant first, and the accountant would work out a plan that seemed to be effective for who they thought was going to be the leader or the successor. Okay. But when it came time to implement that plan, we were seeing a lot of resistance because there had not been the planning go into this that was required to develop all the skills that that successor needed to develop before he became an owner. Okay,
that's fantastic. Go ahead, yeah.
And so as a result of that, when we looked at sort of succession planning 101, it was founders saying, well, is this going to be viable to the accountant? Because before we can proceed with the succession plan, we have to look at a business, strategic business plan. Okay. Is it going to be viable for the successor family or 2 families? So fine, once we establish viability, then the succession plan involved a retirement plan for mom and dad, the typical estate freeze where parents would take the preference shares and redeem them over time as their retirement retirement plan, and the new growth would go to the children. But then in all of this, there wasn't fairness because the non-farming children weren't being considered.
Yeah.
And I really felt that before implementation, we should be going back to square one. And so that led to me joining CAFA, Canadian Association of Farm Advisors. The goal of that not-for-profit is to improve the education, the quality of education that is being provided to farm clients by improving the quality of farm advisors. So that was sort of the next stepping stone. And after that, I thought, well, still, I'm not happy with the results I'm getting, so I think I've heard about this organization called Family Business Exchange,
yes.
which used to be CAFA in Canada.
Okay.
It used to be just for business families, but the principles are applicable to farm families as well. So I became, this course was offered through the Sauder Business School and Ivy Business School. It's 7 intensive modules taken either in Vancouver, Toronto, or Calgary. And what it teaches you is a different way of thinking.
Okay.
That rather than just being a mechanic,
process.
Yeah, then what we need to do is have both the content and the process.
Okay.
And so it's really opened my eyes as to where we find families. There, if you will, there's people call it the 3-circle model.
Okay.
So there's family, there's business, and there's ownership. And really where we become involved is where all those areas intersect, because that's typically where the problems are.
Yep.
And what we found is that, you know, the systems that we were looking at was sort of through a single lens, with an accountant providing a succession plan, 1 to 10, there we go, we're done, we walk away. Whereas the family enterprise advisor looks at, is it a family business or a family enterprise?
Okay.
And, you know, Tracy, just in background talking to you, I would say you have your family has a family enterprise. You look at the operating assets, you look at the real estate, you look at the financial assets, you look at the heirloom assets, and heirloom assets could be a legacy farm, or it could be some other heirloom assets. Maybe you're in the maple sugar business and that's an heirloom asset.
Okay.
And you look at deferred assets like life insurance and annuities. And so what we do, we go in and contract with a family. My client is not the founder or the successor. I won't do a project unless my client is the family.
Everybody in the family.
And then the question becomes, who is family? And that depends on the family. There are situations where I would prefer, when I'm doing these projects, that we include all of the in-laws as well, because I believe they're just as much of the family as the actual original family unit.
Absolutely.
Because there is something called pillow talk, and they're influenced by their spouses.
Yeah.
So in any event, we go in, we contract with the family, and that very important part is contracting. So the question is, why did you call me in? Is there a conflict between father and his brother? Is that gumming up the works? Yeah. Or are you calling me in to do a transition plan? So we contract, then we do what we call discoveries, which quite simply is an interview of each and every family member.
Okay, that's great.
Because what children will tell you around the table when mom and dad are there is far different than reality sometimes.
Yes.
Perceptions of the parents as to what they think will happen is not what necessarily the children are thinking.
Right.
And they've never been given an opportunity to express their opinions. So we interview them all. Then we extract from that information, we analyze that information, put it through a funnel, if you will, to come up with key themes. So after interviewing 6 or 8 people, what were the key themes here? And we go back to the family with those key themes for feedback.
Okay.
And we'll say, okay, this is supposed to be a mirror of your family, is it?
Yeah.
And if it is, these are the themes we're seeing. We're seeing some conflict here. We're seeing over here that there's maybe 2 potential successors and there's a bit of sibling rivalry. There's maybe some issues of entitlement where some family members are upset because someone feels entitled. There's been some nepotism here. So we see these 6 themes or 5 themes or whatever. What of these, what do you want to prioritize?
Okay. That's interesting. And that's a totally different way of doing it.
Well, that's right, because it's people-based.
Yes.
And because the family is composed of people, it should be the family that are, in my view, leading these discussions.
Okay.
We provide the envelope for those discussions to take place. The process, so it's basically process and content consulting to develop context.
Okay.
And once you have that context, then you can get to the heart of the problem, and you can try to have consensual decision making take place, which is a very difficult thing to achieve, and it takes a lot of time.
Okay.
A lot of us experts in law or in accounting want to come in with an expert solution.
Right.
That is just the reverse of what the FAA process is. We are helping the clients continuously plan.
Okay.
And if you think about it, the planning that occurs, it's like a core and 4 strands of a rope. So if you pull on one strand of a rope, the whole thing will fray.
Yes.
So you have to work on it all together. You work on the individual and the family to make sure that the vision and the values are aligned. Because if the family values are not aligned to the business, then you're not going to go anywhere. So you work on the individual, the family, you work on the business, so that could be a strategic plan. You work on the ownership, so the ownership could be shareholders agreements, it could be decisions directors are making, and you try to manage the complexities.
Okay.
And so I think you get a lot, it's a continuous process. So when you go to the dentist, you try to prevent cavities. You don't wait until you have to have an extraction.
Yes.
If you're trying to make decisions when there's been death, divorce, disability, you know, your brain turns to lizard brain and consensus leaves the room.
Yeah, because you're so emotional at that point. You shouldn't be making big decisions at that point.
And this is what happens when there is no plan. Someone rushes in to say, okay, we can create a tax plan that will fix this situation, and I can do the legal work to implement it, but we haven't thought about the effect it's going to have on the people. And a lot of times we meet resistance to that implementation, and the plan ends up in someone's dresser drawer.
Okay. That's why they say it's often unsigned and stored away, right?
That's absolutely right.
Okay. So I want to go back a step for our audience and for myself as well. So the typical approach to succession planning, you said, doesn't quite work anymore. Typically, if I was going to try and succession plan to my children and grandchildren, I would have went in and seen either an accountant or a lawyer and said, okay, you know what, I have my farming operation in Manitoba and I want to work to get this to the next generation. They would have come up with an approach from a legal mind had I seen the lawyer, right?
Which would have been a perfectly good legal plan.
Perfectly good legal plan. And we would have come up with that plan, and it would have been within that silo. We would have tried to implement it, and then it might not have answered all the different complexities and really achieve the end goal, right? Because we thought legal, or we thought accounting, tax management, when, like you said, in a farm operation, there's so many moving pieces. So now, instead of, because I think people often wonder, myself included, how do you even start succession planning? I mean, to me that sounds like a big scary word. What does that all mean? So before we would have seen one individual, and now I love this holistic model that you guys have. It's very common in the business world, the goals, dealing with the people end. So now that's where the family enterprise advisor comes in, and you are the advisor for the family, not one person.
Yeah. So I've taken off my legal hat. I still have the legal knowledge, but I've come in initially, but I have a team of people already who I work with consistently, and it may not be their accountant, and it may not be their financial advisor. It may be our team. You have to be very careful because you need to respect the relationships they have with their own professionals. Sometimes we will use the family's professionals. I'll give you an example right now. We did a reorganization for a tomato farming family.
Oh, really?
And vegetable farming family. They ship vegetables to New Jersey, peppers to New Jersey, and they grow tomatoes in the Chatham-Kent area.
Okay.
And so we did a corporate reorganization for them so that the son would run the operation, and the two daughters happened to be other professionals.
Okay.
And one son had been working for an international corporation, and it had been felt at the time that he was never going to come back to the farm.
Okay.
So now the challenge that I face is that he has two small children, and he and his wife have decided that living in southwestern Ontario is probably not a bad future for him and his family.
Okay.
But what I've been retained to do is to go into that family and help integrate this strong-willed young man with his equally strong-willed brother.
Ooh, boy.
Now, fortunately, these two have, the one fellow who's coming back is an engineer.
Okay.
So they have complementary skills.
Great skill set for farming.
And they are a perfect model for a farm family that will take advice and make their own decisions. But it's very interesting work. It's very gratifying work. I just finished I was retained by a couple of lawyers who represented two brothers whose parent had died many years ago, and the estate had still not been resolved.
Oh, wow.
And you know, when they first came to see me, they wouldn't look at each other and they wouldn't email each other. And we've now actually, after 6 or 8 months of work and frequent meetings, sold one of the operations, and the two of them are actually emailing each other, which is a
great start,
step in the right direction.
Yeah. You know, and that is so neat too, because family, we know family. Talk about family and the farm aside.
That's right.
Family dynamics, we all have them. Now add in a farm business and farming children, off farming, grandchildren, and how to divide that and take care of mom and dad. You know, emotions are always high. Can I call you a leader for a very hard process? Would that be? I
mean, that's the intent, is that we would lead the process, and you could have a project lead depending. There might be another FAA who's an accountant, so that he might lead this particular project. I lead that one, but someone has to lead.
Yes.
And also, in fairness, it's not just when you contract with the family, it is not just the needs of the family. They have to comply with the needs that we have.
Okay.
So the needs that we have are information has to be supplied. Okay. They have to get back to us in a timely manner. We have to have deadlines clients for receiving information. They have to make themselves available, and in some operations they might even have a farm manager or key employee who we may want to interview because they have a different perspective on all of this. So it's not a one-way street. It's we're both we're both involved, both the advisor and the family, in creating value over time. That's really why you want to retain an FEA, is value creation on an intergenerational basis.
That's fantastic. I just think of it for our audience, for farm families, and I can imagine if I was sitting there with 2 more generations, let's say I had children and grandchildren, and we have an operation that we want to bring down to the next generations, trying to sit there and figure out how we're going to do that, because one of my children farm, and while we can't sell off this to give money to these ones, I could imagine somebody just trying to sit at their kitchen table trying to figure this out, then throw in family dynamics, charged emotions. So what a great concept, and I love, and that's why I brought you on the show, because not only are you taking your legal profession, you have that holistic approach, you have the knowledge of the different areas, and you can also lead and direct and get the family's buy-in. I just love it.
Yeah, and that's a very key point, is that, you know, some families this may not work for. Some families may like the expert to create the plan for them and just roll with it. So it's not for everyone, but really, in my view, that's what the theme of this farm show this year was about, is innovation.
Yeah.
And I think that if you don't move forward and innovate, then you're on the downhill course. And what we want is for our clients to keep growing, and through innovation they can take it up another level.
Absolutely. And you know, in the farming community, I can think of handfuls of people that have, well, failed to plan. There's either a will or there isn't, and there's farming children, non-farming children, and then mom or dad, grandpa, grandma pass away, and then everything breaks loose and it's an absolute disaster, and farm families get ruined because of that. Or that's the worst case, the failing to plan, right?
That's right.
That's the worst case.
And it needs to be continuous planning, and I get so upset when clients will come into the office and say to me, well, I won't be here to worry about it. Well, that shows me a very selfish approach and a lack of respect for the balance of your family members. And doing a will and a power of attorney is step A. That's the little step to get started with.
Will and power attorney, okay.
So, and even when we're doing these plans, we'll go in and we, as part of the disclosure, we ask for all the legal documentation, all the financial statements, the tax returns, the life insurance policies, and right from the get-go, when we see something that it needs to be plugged before we proceed to do the plan, we'll recommend it. So if we see, hey, do you realize you have a will that leaves everything equally to all 4 children? We know that's not what you're going to do because your son's out there running the dairy operation. Let's do an interim will so that at least we don't have a complete disaster. Because you're so right. The parents are the glue that hold the family together. And dad passes, we'll pick on the males, but dad passes, and then mom passes, and then unfortunately it all unravels. And the gloves come off. And no family wants that. No.
And you know, that comment that you made too, that I won't be here to see it, so who cares? That's unfortunate too, because I can look at that generation, second generation myself. You know, we work day in, day out, morning to evening. There's a sense of pride in having a farm. And I don't think any of us wants to build this thing up and then go, okay, who cares, right?
That's exactly right. And in southwestern Ontario, you asked me some time ago about farmland and farmland values. Well, we did an $8 million transaction yesterday, and it becomes very difficult to plan with the value of land in southwestern Ontario. So we've been using, like if land is selling for $18,000 or $20,000 an acre in Ontario, in areas, we need to find tools to accommodate those values so that there's at least fairness. It's never going to be equal. Life isn't always equal, but it should be fair. And so sometimes we'll use life insurance to plug a gap, or we'll have some extra farms that are not integral to the operation that maybe non-farming children can own with a lease back to the farm operator.
Okay.
So those are the other tools. Those are the implementation tools. Those are the legal tools. But before you even get there, you need to understand, when you get in your car, presumably you want to know where you're going.
Absolutely.
And you put your Navi on these days rather than set your compass. But at least you have a path, and you and your wife, hopefully in that car, have an aligned vision as to where you're going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And you know, it's just such a smart approach when we all work so hard to build our operations up, and there's so many tough dynamics. And that's one of the things that I wanted to ask too, because we're all busy, right? We work hard day in, day out, and you know, sometimes the stuff is unknown, scary. We gotta go see the lawyers, the accountants. We don't know this stuff. So I think that maybe fear puts a little bit of resistance and procrastination, and we go, well, you know what, the will's fine, it'll all take care of itself. And you know what, why do I want to pay for this consulting and this stuff up front? Because you know that costs. But at the end of the day, I think as smart business people that farmers are, we can think of it this way. It might cost to make sure we do this work right up front, but like you said prior, if we don't plan now and things fall apart and there's tax bills that could have been way higher, you know what, that cost at the end is humongous, right?
Well, that's right, and that's a very good comment. That is part of this systems thinking, is that people like what's called homeostasis, the status quo.
Yes.
Nobody likes change.
No.
But we are there to help manage change and to push people to not maintain the status quo when it's not going to work for them for the future. Now you have to be very careful, because when you make a comment, it's like a stone in the water. There's a big ripple. And so you have to be very respectful. You have to know your boundaries. You have to know where you stop and start. So it's also a delicate balancing act, because you're not in there to, my first rule is do no harm.
Yes, that's a good one.
And everybody is ready to do something, but not everyone is ready to do everything. So that's why it's called continuity planning, and it's a continuous process rather than a process and an event that a succession plan is. This is really a continuous process where you're tweaking all those areas.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so I have one last question.
Sure.
One or two last questions for you, George, as we work to wrap up. I absolutely loved everything that we've discussed, and I think it's just such a holistic, such a great way to make sure that as farmers, what we've worked so hard to build, make sure that we take care of all our children and all our grandchildren. And if we want that farm to continue, that we plan for it and don't just do the failing to plan is planning to fail method. So thank you for sharing all of that with us.
Quite welcome.
I really, really appreciate that. And I want to get that holistic thinking out to our audience. So I am Farmer Tracy cap on right now, and I am ready to talk transition, talk succession planning. Who do I see, and what questions are good questions to start with?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question, and it's probably what a lot of the viewers will be interested in. And certainly yes, I'm an FAA advisor, and you can go on the Family Business Exchange, and that's with an X, change website, and all of the advisors in Canada are listed. There's about 250 of us, or 300.
Oh, wow.
But in addition to that, most areas of the country have excellent lawyers and excellent accountants and financial advisors where you can at least start. And I think some of the questions I'd be asking my own family lawyer is, do you do this kind of work? Because some professionals feel that this is a little bit touchy-feely, and they are interested in just doing the mechanics. However, there are many extremely talented accounting firms across the country who have advisory practices, and so that is a good place to start. Start with your own professionals, but ask them the tough questions. Do they work as a team or not? And I would say if the answer is no, I would be inclined to find out, well then, who do you know that does work as a multidisciplinary team? Because I think they'll get the best, if you will, bang for their buck that way. You can find capable farm advisors also on the CAFA, Canadian Association of Farm Advisors website. That's head office for that is in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And
I think they list professionals by province and then even by area as well.
Yes, they do, Tracy. And the other thing that I would encourage people to, I mean, there are a multitude of succession planning conferences out there. And so just attend one or two to get the flavor of what it is you should be thinking about. And I would say start early. Obviously, you're not going to be doing any succession planning when your children are in diapers. But common sense is going to say that, you know, if the children are in their late teens and they have an avocation for farming and an interest in farming, get them educated, get them to University of Guelph or an ag college, and you'll be surprised, they will be some of your best resources when you're thinking about this subject matter. The biggest takeaway for all of this is try to have some family meetings. And not around the kitchen table. Have an agenda, and above all, the biggest failure in this whole process is a lack of communication. So if I could give you 3 tips as to how to improve the situation, it would be communicate, communicate, communicate.
Oh, I love it. You can't get better words of wisdom than that. Thank you so much, George. This is such an important topic, and you have been great explaining your experience and that holistic approach. So on behalf of myself, our Impact Farming audience, I would like to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was great. Wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you. And for our audience at home, what I'll be doing, George shared a few references and different places to go to find more information or advisors. On our show page below at the notes, I'm going to include some links. I'll work with George to make sure that we have all those references there. So anything that we mentioned during the show, you can go down there, click, and be on your way to finding a family enterprise advisor, a CAFA advisor, some of those resources. So that'll be all in the show notes for you guys. Once again, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Talk to you soon.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.